Hi all, let's look at yet another interesting game from the World Candidates Tournament 2018, so in round 1. Levon Aronian against Ding Liren. C4 from Levon, the English opening. Knight f6, knight c3, e6, e4, d5, e5, d4, e takes, d takes, b takes c3, queen takes f6, d4, pretty standard stuff so far, b6, until here. This looks like a novelty move now that's played. h4 is quite a rare bird move. It has certain ideas. It does support bishop g5 to hit the queen here. More standard is knight f3, bishop b7, bishop d3. As you might expect this sort of thing to be more standard than h4. So interesting stuff. So bishop b7. Now this is used. Bishop g5, queen f5, bishop d3, queen a5, and you can see c3 is hit and g2 is hit here. And white now plays king f1. So this is weird and wacky, this opening. It's not particularly great to give up the g2 pawn here, for example, like this. Black would be slightly better there, it seems. So king f1, weird and wacky stuff. Knight c6, not taking on c3. This is really dangerous. If black took on c3, knight e2 protects d4 as well as hitting the queen, and this would be pretty unpleasant, this position, after c5 here in particular. So yeah, it's just too dangerous, that position. So black wisely just plays, let's see, after queen a5, king f1, just plays knight c6, rook b1, and now black really wants to try and castle queenside, but that bishop's stopping that move being legal. So f6 is played. Now we have bishop dropping back. Black castles queenside. a4. So it looks as though this could be tricky for the queen here. She hasn't got that many squares at all, really. After rook b5, there is, except for the key one, a6. Otherwise, yeah, the queen's stranded. We have e5. Trying to put pressure down this d file with the rooks like this. Yeah, black's rook in the center looks more effective than usual, perhaps. c5, making way for c4 to hit the queen, but also, yeah, I mean, there's other dangers now. This bishop and the rook to harass the queen as well. So it looks like a really tricky position to play for both sides. An alternative here, rook h3, is weird and wacky. E takes, c takes, hitting the queen. We have bishop b4 here. This kind of position, this is a crazy line, ends up being slightly better for white. Yeah, it is crazy stuff, demonstrating the d-file pressure and black picking up a load of pawns here. But it ends up slightly better for white. Okay, so that's crazy, rook h3. But yeah, we have actually c5. Bishop takes c5, because that pawn's kind of pinned to d3. But we have rook b5 now, queen a6. And here now, rook h3 is played. It's just a crazy position. If bishop f5 check, this position, black's actually okay after knight e7 hitting the bishop. c6, because there's that pin there, because the king being on f1 here. And this is going to be good for black after queen a5 using that pin. It's going to be good for black. If we continue this on, I know this is madness, these variations, but black has a small edge here, technically. Okay, so yeah, rook h3, bishop takes d4 is played. So the one obvious question is, well, what happens on c takes d4? This wasn't played c takes d4, but on rook takes d4, yeah, this pawn's dropping off next. For example, knight e2, queen takes a4, rook b3, and black could end up with a small edge again, because there's these pins on this diagonal as well to factor in. Yep, so that's interesting. So c takes d4 doesn't seem to work too well. Bishop e2 was played, which means the rook is protecting now c3 here. Rook d6. Now rook b1 hitting the queen. This is interesting, this position. I mean, it looks as though black's pretty, logical in his play to try and pile up on the d file to double the rooks. But it seems here that, technically there's a move here which might actually be better than what was played. Rook b2 protecting d2 here, hitting the queen. I'll give you some example variations. Queen a5, now daring to take on d4, which looks really dangerous after queen d5, because look, there's a battery here against g2. And so say this, knight d4, it looks scary because of g2, but knight f3, it seems as though white might end up on top here. If we count the pawns, it's 2 pawns for a piece. If black simplified, not they probably would, but just an example line, white has a big advantage there. So it does seem as though rook b2 might have something going for it here. Rook b2. Interestingly, let's run that through again. But rook b1 was played. So rook b1 instead of rook b2. I want to show you something else here, though. Rook b2. I think there's another idea here. Instead of knight d4, we'll try knight takes e5 here, hitting g2. Here, knight f3, knight d3, and it looks impressive for black because all of black's pieces are really quite aggressive. Maybe this is why Levon didn't really like this particularly. It looks visually a bit suspect, as though this is kind of Ding Liren's cup of tea, this position, because it's very, very tactical. It's extremely dynamic and tactical. Rook c2, queen e4, but it seems white might actually be in a position to somehow consolidate, even though there's a lot of pressure, it seems. Here, technically, white's doing well, although it is scary looking. It looks as though the bishop's kind of pinned to d1 here, but yeah, there's pressure on c7. Yeah, I mean, if white was a computer, yeah, white's doing really well. but it's kind of scary because in practice, look at all of black's pieces, they're really aggressive. White's rooks are just awkward. The d-file, the doubling rooks is a kind of human thing. It's kind of human, nice to have well coordinated pieces. So it's tricky. It's just tricky. So you can understand these variations are scary looking, even if white ends up technically with material advantage. So anyway, so in the game we have, instead of rook b2, rook b1, and which discovers the attack on the queen, and we get actually a repetition here. Yeah, we get a repetition. Here they agree to draw. So yeah, although it was a draw, it's kind of, there's a lot behind the scenes in this game, and if you want to look at some of the variations again in more detail, there's a replay link I'll give in the comments and the description of the videos. It's of this video. It's pretty tactical underneath the surface. So quite interesting and original, this H4 stuff in the opening. It seems a lot of the openings in round 1 did have some novel ideas. So I think the players are maybe factoring in a little bit the audience, to keep the audience kind of interested in the candidates. It went with a bang. 3 of the 4 games decisive the first round, so yeah, it's captured, I think, audience expectations round 1, and this was the only draw. But even so, this is kind of a bit of a very exciting variations behind the scenes here. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.